So as the House of Commons in the lower classes really grew in power in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, you had more institutional access for the various classes, and you saw the rise of party discipline as well. Today, a member faces light forms of co-optation and coercion. Co-optation, what I mean by this is that you need long periods of loyal party service in the Commons to make it really to the top, to gain ministerial status, or certainly the head of the party and prime ministership. In terms of coercion, what I mean is that you can be ejected from a parliamentary party if you don't vote the party line on specific issues. So this is important. This was long a two-party system. Today we call it a 2.5-party system. The Liberal Democrats and a couple regional parties make up this sort of half a party. There's only been one period in the 1970s when conservatives or labor did not have a majority. But as of today, and so that's when it was a two-party system. So that was back in the 1970s. You had a period of economic crisis, and this drove a third party in. But today, for the last several years, we've had the Liberal Democrats occupying an important place and a coalition government, very unusual. So we'll start with the Labor Party. The Labor Party has historically been a product of trade unionism. It was established in 1900. Remember, the trade unions became active in the mid-1800s. And they averaged about 25%, the Labor Party averaged about 25% of the vote until 1945, when they gained a huge victory, nearly 50% of the vote, as opposed to 36% for the Conservatives. And they got 61% of the seats in Parliament. And why? Well, because they were ideologically moderate socialists, so they favored a very strong welfare state. And again, after the carnage of World War II, people supported that. So historically, they were working class based, but this became problematic as the working class began to dry up in the 1970s. And this led to internal party divisions. You had, on one hand, you had radical socialists who wanted to show the worker credentials more aggressively, and then you had moderates who wanted to be more centrist to accommodate broader society, again, as a result of this crisis in the 1970s. Eventually, they rewrote the party constitution to limit trade union influence on the party. And finally, after some dry years, 1979 to 1997, when the Conservatives were in power, Blair won big in that year, in 1997. Now they sort of represent ideologically sort of a third way. They're neoliberal, but they've got care for the collective. As of 2012, they had 254 members in the House of Commons. So they're sort of the standard sort of social democrats with a neoliberal spin. The conservatives are the moderate right. They did support the welfare state after World War II, but then they also, during the economic crisis in the 1970s, they faced a split between those who demanded a limited welfare state and those who were pushing for much more radical free market reforms. This is Thatcher and her crew, and the Thatcherites won out. As of 2012, this group had 305 members in Parliament. So since 2010, David Cameron has been the Prime Minister, and I'll update this in a subsequent slide if that changes. Well, this is still online. But in 2010, David Cameron became the Prime Minister. He was the leader of the Conservatives. But he only became a Prime Minister thanks to a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, extremely unusual in the British system. So the Liberal Democrats, the third party out here, started in 1988, and they usually got about 17, 20, 22% of the vote. What they stand for is individual freedoms and a weaker state, sort of like our libertarians in the U.S., but they also emphasize collective equality. So they do want more taxation and social spending, which is more sort of laborish. And so there's sort of really somewhere in between the conservatives and labor, with some quirks. In 2012, they gained 57 members. This was they had the largest showing ever in 2010 when they got 23% of the vote. And when I say in 2012 they got, what I should say is as of 2012 they have 57 members. They got these in the 2010 vote when they got 23% of the vote, which again was their best ever. 97 they had 17%. 18% in 2001, 22% in 2005, so slowly increasing. And so they became part of a coalition government in 2010, because you had a hung parliament. There was no party with a majority. Again, very unusual. As a result of this, they got 1/5 of the cabinet spots, including the deputy prime minister position. But watch what you wish for, because this could be poisonous for them. And we'll talk about this in other cases, in the French case, for example, where third parties have really had to compromise their values once they've gotten into a coalition government. And then they become discredited on the political stage. So the Liberal Democrats have to be wary of this, or it could be a boon for them and make them more mainstream. In addition, I did mention regional parties. These are usually ethnic-based. Usually you've got Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish parties. So, for example, the Scottish National Party in 2007 became the largest party in the Scottish Parliament. So Scotland's got its own autonomous parliament, which deals with more local issues. They got 33% of the vote, and they led a minority government. But it was hard to gain the backing of Scottish Labour, which had 32% of the vote back then, the Conservatives, which had 16.5%, and the Liberal Democrats, which had 16%. Now, the Scottish National Party is the one that's actually favoring independence. And they, again, in the 2012 elections, they got the most seats, 65 seats, as opposed to 37, so half that Labour got, and the Conservatives only got 15. Liberal Democrats only got 5. And the Scottish Green Party only got 2. And so they're the ones who have pushed for this referendum on independence, which is slated for 2014. I should also mention that the Scottish National Scottish National Party does have 6 members in the House of Commons. So this is important. Note that there's really a lack of much support for radical parties because you've got a tradition of liberal tolerance for various views. But this is also a function of their electoral system, which I'll talk about in a second. So the parties that you find in the UK case tend to be very sort of mainstream, not radical parties. In terms of the electoral system, this is an SMD plurality system, which means it's a first-past-the-post system. You have 646 constituencies for the House of Commons. This is based on population, so it's about 1 MP or member of parliament per 65,000 voters. So each constituency obviously gets 1 member of parliament because it's a single-member district. The system really penalizes smaller parties, as we talked about before, which, unless they're regionally concentrated, are diluted. You need to win more than any other candidate in a given district to come up with a seat. And so really Labour and the Conservatives have been the only ones able to do that. Liberal Democrats, as of late, have been somewhat successful as well. Now, regionally concentrated parties, though, can do better. You might have only 1% of the popular vote in the country, but if that 1% is all based in 2 districts and makes up more than 50% of either one, you're going to get 1, or if it makes up 50% or more in both of those, or really just a plurality, so more than any other party, you're going to get those seats. So for example, let me give you an example of the Liberal Democrats, this third party. In 2005, they got 22% of the vote. In 2010, they got 23%. If this had been concentrated in a given region, they might have gotten a plurality in 120 or so districts. But because it was diluted, because this 23% of the popular vote was scattered around the country, maybe they got 30% of the vote compared to 40% of the vote for Labour in many regions. They just won where they could get this plurality. And so they came out with 62 seats instead of 120 seats. What this means is that you've got 2 big parties that appear bigger than they really are. They have clear majorities in Parliament when they don't really have them, when they don't really have that many more votes than some other party, like the Liberal Democrats. It's all about the distribution of these votes. This is really, really important. This is especially true where votes are wasted on third-party candidates. Say the Liberals get 30%, the Conservatives get 34%, and Labour gets 36% in many districts. Well, Labour is going to win each of those districts where that happens, but you still have a huge outpouring for the Liberals, the Liberal Democrats, as well as the Conservatives. Again, it's another problem with the SMD system. Now you've got some concrete examples to let you know why the SMD plurality system can be problematic. One thing I want to talk about before I end here is civil society. And I don't have a slide for this. But because... Do I really not have a slide for this? Right. Because of party discipline, In other words, you do what your party tells you to do. There's been a lot less interest group activity in the British case than, for example, in the United States. Those that do exist, those organizations that do exist, go to the top of the party or the bureaucracies to make their case, because that's where the power is, and those are the people who are making the decisions. You also do have quasi-autonomous NGOs, policy advisory boards appointed by the government, but that bring interest groups and government officials together to discuss, something in a specific sphere. You've got trade unions, which were historically strong but are much weaker now, thanks to a change in economy and also the legacy of Thatcher-era restrictions. Although you still do have electoral support for the Labour Party, as I've mentioned. You've got business organizations like the Confederation of British Industry, which is usually pro-conservative. But generally speaking, this is not a country where civil society is incredibly active. In terms of a potential question I might put up here, I want you to think about, and I haven't decided if I'll put this up or not for this semester, but I want you to think about the British experience transplanted. What were the key elements of the British democratization process, and how can these help us understand democratization in other places? Okay, to what extent can we expect the British case to be transplanted in the 20th century or the 21st century? We're in the 21st now, sorry. In the 21st century, when you've got different conditions. Think about what we talked about in the political economy section, in the less developed countries section, the way the global economy works today, the globalization section. Can we expect this British experience to exist again? So I might put this up and I might not. But we're done for now. So the British case is over.